to simulate different times of day. That way, as they move throughout their day, you know, we're used to when the sun sets here, that means the day is over. But if you see it 16 times that day, it could be a little bit confusing. So some of those lights help regulate the body's responses to what time of day it is and even wind down in the evening.
It would be incredible to get the opportunity to watch sunset every 90 minutes, though. I think that would be an exciting aspect of being on space.
You would have to pull me out of the cupola. Now, I just got an update that the mid-course maneuver is in work, so we are standing by. Again, a small burn like this one just helps us retarget or realign the International Space Station as we continue moving ever closer. If you squint really hard on the left side, you can see that the nose cone is open on Dragon. That happened shortly after launch yesterday, maybe about 12 minutes after launch or 13 minutes. We started opening that nose cone, and that protects the hatch while we are launching. But once we're in space, obviously we want that exposed so that as we get to the space station today, we can connect the two spacecraft together and eventually welcome our 2 new crew members on board.
The next major milestone we're tracking on our flight today is expected to be Dragon's arrival at Waypoint 0. Just about 20 minutes from now. Again, Waypoint 0 is going to be one of those first checkpoints during our approach to the station. Dragon can hold there at 400 meters at Waypoint 0, but if all of its systems check out, Dragon can continue on its approach to Waypoint 1.
Now, Waypoint 1, or the Dragon's move from Waypoint 0 to Waypoint 1, that swings it up and out in front of the station, arriving at a distance of approximately 200 meters, and 220 meters, I should say, because that puts it on what we call
Freedom. SpaceX on the big loop. Mid-course correction maneuver is complete. Performance nominal. The trajectory has converged on Waypoint 0.
Southeast, good turn, converge to Waypoint 0.
All right, just as we were discussing, it really just refines that trajectory and it's putting them up toward Waypoint 0. So that's our next major milestone. But once we move past Waypoint 0 and to Waypoint 1, again, that's about 220 meters directly in front of the space station. So that puts us on the docking axis, which essentially means it's directly in front of the docking port. And again, today they are headed to the forwardmost port on station. That is Node 2 forward. So again, Dragon is docked to Node 2. We call it Harmony for all of our crewed missions so far, because that's where both international docking adapters are located. And these are installed for new commercial spacecraft flights, as well as any other future spacecraft that use the international docking standard.
These views we're getting of Dragon right now are incredible, with the clouds on Earth in the background.
Yeah, let's take a look. It looks like they are actually flying 264 statute miles just north of New Zealand. So if we didn't have those clouds, we might have gotten a really beautiful look at New Zealand below. I'm sure they'll get plenty of chances over the next 5 months as they look out the cupola.
Moving forward in our timeline today, once Dragon is only 20 meters away at Waypoint 2, the spacecraft focuses on aligning its docking system with the International Docking Adapter, or IDA for short. We may hear the call out CHOP over the nets, which stands for Crew Hands Off Point, a little less than 30 seconds before docking. At that point, any aborts would have to be done automatically by Dragon.
Of course, once we get that close to the space station, the next major milestone is crew arrival, so docking. Dragon will fly in and make contact with the International Docking Adapter, and that's what we call soft capture. That soft capture ring will then retract until sensors indicate it's time for 12 hooks to drive in place and give us the hard capture that will firmly secure Dragon to its new home on the International Space Station. The space station crew, it'll be mainly NASA astronaut Jeanette Epps, will manually pressurize the vestibule, or the area between the Dragon hatch and the station hatch. But I feel like we always see a handful of crew members floating in and out, helping out with that effort. I think it's a pretty exciting time for everyone when new folks arrive at the station. So while they're pressurizing that vestibule, the umbilicals that provide power, audio, and data communications and connections from the station to Dragon are put in place. And then it's time for the leak checks and the hatch opening, which is currently timelined to come a little more than 2 hours after docking. Again, targeting docking today around 2:30 p.m. Pacific time, so just about an hour from now. Now, our next call-outs we expect to hear a little less than 7 minutes from now are the go and no-go for Waypoint 0 approach. Again, we don't have to stop at waypoint 0, but they have the opportunity if they need to.
Station Houston on the Big Loop. Dragon range is approximately 1,000 meters. Monitor long-range approach per steps 1 to 4 in 1.102 Dragon approach and retreat monitoring. ISS crew is now back up for vehicle approach monitoring.
Presentation copies 1.102, step 1.
Currently aboard the International Space Station itself, it's about 8 p.m. because they use GMT or Greenwich Mean Time. And so it is winding down most of the day for our crew members on orbit. However, like we mentioned earlier, NASA astronauts Matt Dominic and Mike Barrett will be in the cupola and helping to monitor the arrival of Dragon. But as we just heard, a reminder that really Nick and Alexander are prime for monitoring the arrival of their spacecraft. The crew on the space station could send any retreat commands to Dragon if they absolutely needed to, but we expect that our crew members inside the spacecraft itself would be prime for that. And we did just have a satellite handover. So we use the tracking data and relay satellite systems aboard the International Space Station. These are positioned at different locations, and as we hand over from one to another, it's all planned and tracked, but it means we do lose some video communications at some points, and sometimes even audio, but we expect to regain that pretty shortly.
Right on time. They're back, yeah. We are, of course, tracking Dragon with a camera at the moment, so that means we're adjusting it manually periodically. So you may see it move around a little bit on your screen. But when Dragon does come back into view, you'll have a really good view of that forward, there we go, that forward nose cone open so that we can see that docking adapter, which is what, of course, we will use to mate to the ISS, first through that soft capture, then that hard capture. And then when we open up the hatch a couple of hours later, that is the section of the spacecraft that our 2 astronauts will move through as they join the Expedition 72 crew.
I did just get a notification that we are inside the AE, or the approach ellipsoid. Again, that is the first of those invisible boundaries around the International Space Station that we monitor. That means that if Dragon, before it has the go to approach or go inside the AE, it has to be 24 hours safe. So if it were to somehow lose control of its thrusters, it would take 24 hours for it to move inside that approach ellipsoid. So the next of those invisible boundaries is the keep out sphere. It's a little bit different. You have a 6-hour free safe trajectory, meaning that neither Dragon nor station would impact each other. These views are pretty amazing, and they are coming to us from Cronus in Houston. That's one of our flight control team members in Mission Control itself. And so they are tracking Dragon, and you can see them moving the camera as they keep up with the spacecraft continuing to approach the space station.
We've said it already on this particular webcast, but it's worth repeating that the approach ellipsoid is significant in large part because these vehicles are both moving so fast. Again, the approach ellipsoid is about 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 4 kilometers. But in terms of spacecraft orbital dynamics, that's actually pretty close, in no small part because both Dragon and the International Space Station right now are traveling more than 17,000 miles per hour, which also means they're orbiting the Earth roughly every 90 minutes.
And again, I just mentioned that these views are coming from the Cronus console. I have the full definition now. That one's always hard for me to remember, but it stands for Communication Radio Frequency Onboard Network Utilization Specialist. So you can't blame me if I can't spat it out right away. But yes, our team members at that console are providing us great views of Dragon and usually do such a great job.
Freedom SpaceX on the Big Loop. Ground is go for approach 0 and will be enabling the maneuver shortly. Expected approach 0 start at 204530 Zulu.
Freedom copies 204530 Zulu, and we see the flag.
All right, so a little bit about this mission. We have what most people are familiar with is the idea of a mission patch. These have gone back generations. But if you don't know how they come to exist, for decades now, crew members have worked together to develop the patch for their mission, and they determine what aspects of the mission they want to highlight and any special details they'd like to include. Now, the crew themselves can design their patch, or they can share their design ideas with an artist who make it come to life.
The Crew-9 mission patch, which you have a great view of on your screen right now, depicts the trail of a rocket launching en route to the International Space Station, which will be home for long-duration expedition dedicated to service, science, and collaboration.
Coastal waves are inspired by the historic Florida launch site and on a larger scale represent our blue planet, the global ocean, which you get a live view of right now, connecting all the continents.
And then a falcon with the number 9 as its beak and a crescent moon as its eye is a nod to the Falcon 9 rocket, while the constellation Draco honors the Dragon spacecraft that is taking Crew-9 to their destination and that we are watching live from space right now.
The Delta symbol, which was first used in 1961, evokes historic ties to the earliest days of space endeavors.
Human exploration of space is built on international collaboration and depends on the support of multitudes across the globe whose efforts honor that heritage.
I love mission patches. I love looking back at some of my favorites, but I love the colors in this one. It's definitely been a favorite. So yesterday, we saw a look at the zero-G indicator, which is always a surprise for us, too. I had no idea what to expect. But it was a small Falcon plush that had been to space before. We heard Nick Hague talking about it, the commander. It flew with he and Alexei Ovchinin on their Soyuz flight to the station in 2019. And what I wanted to mention earlier was Alexei Ovchinin is also on the space station right now. So they're doing a reunion in space. It'll be he, Nick Hague, and this Falcon plush. And they've now arrived on 2 different spacecraft this time, but back together in space.
I love those testaments to really like the human nature behind human spaceflight, whether it's the mission patch or the zero-G indicator. And of course, it should be a good reunion for that team when they finally get on board the ISS.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, still getting great views of Dragon as it continues its approach to the International Space Station. It looks like the next major milestone will be the go, no-go to approach Waypoint 1. So expecting that in just a couple of minutes. We've had a couple of great burns, or I should say successful burns, keeping us on track with the station this morning. Again, though, looking to move to Waypoint 1 in just a couple of minutes. So standing by for those calls.
The zoom out we're getting on Dragon right now is really putting in perspective the size of the capsule relative to the Earth behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're zoomed in so close, and it's a testament to how good the cameras are outside the space station too. You could see every little detail almost, and they're still pretty far away. So they've not quite reached Waypoint 0 yet. We're going to be waiting for that go no go for Waypoint 1, as I just mentioned, in just a couple of minutes. But they are still a little bit away from the space station. Again, they'll be swinging up and out in front. So pretty soon we will lose those views of Earth behind Dragon as it becomes out in front of the space station.
So we have to enjoy them now while we have them.
Yes.
All that being said, Dragon is still really moving pretty fast as it approaches the station. Just a couple of minutes ago, we heard the call out from Mission Control that they were about 1,000 meters away. And again, Waypoint 0 is just 400 meters away. So we're moving pretty quickly considering how big Dragon and the ISS both are.
We are now, again, both Dragon and the International Space Station traveling about 260 miles above Earth. So let's see if I can pull up our trajectory or our map again. It looks like they are flying just over Kiribati. So that is in the Pacific Ocean. And they'll be moving south of Hawaii soon. But you can actually spot the International Space Station with your naked eye. I love being able to look up, and I wave at them every time. I know they can't see me. I'm not even a speck to them from the International Space Station, but we do have an amazing app called Spot the Station where you can plug in your location and you can get almost real-time updates, or actually you can get real-time updates of when they will be flying overhead and where to locate them. There's now kind of a trajectory path. It'll help you by using your camera, and it'll align with the space station, so you know exactly where to look. But it's hard to miss once you're outside, because I believe it is the second brightest object in the night sky, only second to the moon itself.
I'm always impressed when I see the ISS go over. It is much brighter than you would expect it to be, so there's no mistaking it for a plane or anything like that. And obviously the Spot the Station app is really helpful in making sure that you don't miss it when you can see it.
Truly, it is unmistakable. Once you see it coming over the horizon, you're like, that is definitely it. And part of that, really, the reason you can see it so well is because of the size of the solar arrays on it. So you can only see it in dusk and dawn when it is dark outside, but the sun is still reflecting on those solar arrays. So it is just like a bright, beautiful star coming across the sky. And like you mentioned, there's no blinking light on it. So when you see it, you know it's not a plane. This is where we will have, once these two arrive today, we will have 11 people living and working aboard the station. Now, again, just a recap of where we've been so far. Yesterday, we launched on time at 10:17 a.m. Pacific time, and about 45 minutes after liftoff at 11:03 a.m. Pacific, Dragon executed the phase burn. That was the first of 5 major burns required to raise Dragon's orbit and position it for approach to the International Space Station. Dragon raised its orbit using those Draco thrusters over the last several hours as it chases down its destination.
And then shortly after that, the boost burn took place at 7:58 p.m. Pacific. The boost burn put our crew in an orbit where Dragon's apogee, or the highest point, was about 10 kilometers lower than the station. But before we can approach the space station, we need Dragon's entire orbit, not just that highest point, to be effectively shadowing the space station. So after that, we executed the close co-elliptic burn at 8:42 p.m. Pacific. The close burn placed Dragon on an orbit roughly co-elliptic with the space station, meaning it was maintaining an orbit roughly 10 kilometers lower than the station, or roughly 6 miles, the entire way around the Earth. Again, that's in contrast to only being 10 kilometers lower than the station during Dragon's apogee, or the highest point in its orbit, which was achieved by that previous boost burn.
From there, this morning at 7:54 a.m. Pacific, we executed the 4th major maneuver known as the transfer burn. That's where we raised Dragon's apogee, or the highest point of its orbit, to just 2.5 kilometers lower than the station. Then we conducted the final co-elliptic burn at 8:41 a.m. Pacific to once again maintain a constant orbit lower than the station all the way around. Again, that time just 2.5 kilometers below. That burn lasted just over 30 seconds. We also added in the approach out of plane burn at 11:30 a.m. Pacific to further refine Dragon's trajectory to the space station.
During this approach, SpaceX flight controllers will work in tandem with the NASA team in Houston to maneuver Dragon Freedom to the proper altitude. And we've already heard a lot of conversation back and forth between both teams on the nets already. Together, they'll initialize the navigation sensors used for this methodical approach to station. They'll also activate and test out a number of systems on Dragon, including bidirectional communications with the station using the C2V2 system. C2V2 stands for Common Communications for Visiting Vehicles, and it sets up a data stream from Dragon to the station, giving us another path for Dragon telemetry to come to the ground and giving an additional command capability to astronauts aboard the station.
At approximately 1:01 p.m. Pacific, we saw Dragon fire the approach initiation burn when we were about 2.5 kilometers below the station and about 7 kilometers behind it. That is swinging Dragon up until it's about a quarter mile directly below the station. That's also moving Dragon inside the approach ellipsoid. So we did hear a confirmation of that shortly earlier. That's also called the AE, an imaginary shape measuring 4 by 2 by 2 kilometers and essentially a large three-dimensional oval. The capsule was considered to be on what we call a 24-hour safe trajectory. That means if Dragon somehow lost control to all its thrusters, it would be at least 24 hours before its trajectory would move inside the approach ellipsoid.
Next up, we're standing by to hear the NASA and SpaceX teams do a go, no-go poll to move Dragon inside of the keep-out sphere, another checkpoint that consists of an imaginary sphere around the station, this time with a radius of just 200 meters. Flight controllers use this to monitor all arriving and departing vehicles. This is another chance to confirm that all of the guidance, navigation, and control systems are working correctly on Dragon before moving closer to station. Great views now on your screen of Dragon both outside the capsule and inside the capsule as we are looking over the shoulder of our 2 Crew-9 members on board Dragon. The keep-out sphere carries a similar requirement to the approach ellipsoid that if Dragon were to somehow lose control of its thrusters, it and the space station would be safe for 4 orbits, or about 6 hours, rather than the 24 hours required to enter the approach ellipsoid. Once Dragon arrives at 400 meters below the station, it will be at what is known as waypoint 0, and we're standing by for that confirmation now. That's our first checkpoint during our approach. The vehicle can either hold there at 400 meters, but if all of its systems check out, it can also continue on its approach to waypoint 1.
And I just got an update as you were saying that we are now in waypoint 0. So now that we are here, we will move up to waypoint 1. That'll swing Dragon up and out in front of the station, arriving at a distance of approximately 220 meters. That'll put us on the docking axis, so that means we'll be directly in front of the docking port. And again, we're going to node 2 forward. That is the forward-most port on station. Dragon is always docked to node 2, also known as Harmony, because that is where the IDAs are, or the International Docking Adapters, and that is for all of these commercial spacecraft flights, as well as any futures.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop. Approach 0 has started and trajectory converged on waypoint 1. Expect arrival at waypoint 1 at 2110.
Copies. Arrival at 2001.
All right, confirmation from the Corps, the Crew Operations and Resource Engineer here in Hawthorne, to the crew aboard Dragon that they are indeed now at waypoint 0 and will begin moving up to waypoint 1.
And Dragon, that our waypoint 1 arrival time is 2110.
2110.
All right, confirmation. We did just reach the waypoint 0 milestone, and we are now heading up to waypoint 1. We'll be swinging out and in front of the space station, so enjoy those views of Dragon with Earth behind it, because we will soon be losing those as we will see Dragon with space behind it, bringing it out in front of the International Space Station. And it sounds like we can expect that arrival in about 22 minutes at waypoint 1. So to give us a little more of insight of what's happening on the space station side of things, I'm going to toss it over to my colleague, Gary Jordan in Houston. Gary, how's it going?
Hey Leah, going great. We're following along with the operations, same as you, all along the way. Great to see that approach 0 initiation has been executed. This is when Dragon is 400 meters immediately below the International Space Station, and as you said, is going to swing out and up in front. So yes, we're definitely enjoying the same views that you are over there in Hawthorne. Now, aboard the International Space Station, Matt Dominic and Mike Barrett are in the cupola, watching and getting these incredible views that we're seeing now, but they have the backup capabilities and a connection with the Dragon to execute any board abilities. But right now, they're just monitoring. Everything looking fantastic aboard the Dragon, and its approach to the International Space Station happening per the timeline. And we're expecting a docking time around the expected time at this hour, 4:30 p.m. Central Time. Now, as the Dragon swings up and around in front of the International Space Station, we can confirm that the space station itself is in the docking attitude. Thrusters have been moved over to the Russian thrusters, and the attitude is in an expected configuration optimal for the docking of Nick Hague and Alexander Gorbanov to the International Space Station, which you're seeing there on the screen to your right. And of course, seeing views of the International Space Station all along the way. Now, a little bit more about what to expect once the Dragon moves in front of the docking axis. That waypoint 1 is right outside an area that's called the Keep Out Sphere. Now, outside of that, you're hearing these go, no-go polls, and we're providing updates of the joint teams that are working together to make sure that the crew is safely approaching the International Space Station, and all requirements are being passed before proceeding to go to the next milestone. That milestone of waypoint 1 is just outside the Keep Out Sphere. Once we're inside the Keep Out Sphere, which is about 180 meters away from the International Space Station from the docking axis, then we're in a new set of flight rules. We'll plan to pause at about the waypoint 2 marker. This is just about 20 meters in front of the docking axis. If everything looks good, it'll just be a short changeover in the mode to enable the final approach for contact and capture with the forward port of the International Space Station. From there, we'll say farewell to our colleagues over that you are covering over there in Hawthorne, in SpaceX Mission Control with Leah and Ronnie, and we'll take coverage here in Mission Control Houston to oversee the hatch opening and welcome ceremony operations. There's a few hatches on board the International Space Station that we need to pass. There's the Dragon hatch itself, of course, but there's also an 8-pass hatch that's on the other side of that hatch, as well as the Node 2 hatch. 3 hatches to get through until the 2 crew members aboard Crew-9 can be welcomed by the 9 crew members aboard the International Space Station. But as mentioned, the International Space Station is in the right configuration, the docking configuration, and will remain as such. The view that you're seeing on your screen where the space station is pointed, it will remain pointed in that position. You can see the solar arrays that are sort of the wings from this perspective of the Crew-9 Dragon Freedom vehicle. Those solar alpha rotary joints that control the solar arrays on the International Space Station have been locked, and they'll be in that position to avoid any uninterrupted communication and maximize our TDRS coverage views and the beautiful views we're getting from both the station as well as the Crew-9 Dragon, and minimize any interference with any of the thrusters that are on board. Now, in the dual view you'll see the views from the station and the Dragon get incrementally interrupted. That's expected as both vehicles are traveling 17,500 miles per hour. Dragon cabin views are enabled by ground stations positioned strategically around the Earth. So we'll be sharing some of the views from inside the Dragon cabin as we get them, as they are beautiful views, and it's wonderful to see over the shoulders of Nick Hague and Alexander Gorbanov the views of from the International Space Station that we're seeing now as Crew-9 Dragon passes over the Earth are covered by the tracking data and relay satellites. These are satellites that are positioned in a geosynchronous orbit, approximately 23,000 miles from the Earth, whereas the vehicles we're seeing now are approximately 250 miles. Now you see we'll be having some intermittent loss of that video coverage. That's expected as we orbit the Earth. The antennas will be hopping from one of the TDRS satellites to the other, and we'll be providing as much coverage as we can. During docking operations, we do make sure that our KU band frequency capabilities to provide the beautiful video that we see is maximized, but we will have incremental loss, and so we're experiencing that now as we continue with ground station coverage from the Dragon itself, providing these views of the International Space Station. As Dragon swings out and up in front of the International Space Station, we're starting to get views of that Zenith port, where the other Crew Dragon is docked. That's Dragon Endeavour docked to the Zenith port of the International Space Station. The Crew-8 astronauts on board will be welcoming Nick Hague and Alexander Gorbanov soon after docking. But they'll begin a 7-day handover period until they undock at approximately October 7th is the date that we're currently tracking for the earliest opportunity for Crew-8 to undock and splash down off the coast of Florida, returning the 4 astronauts home and cosmonauts.
Freedom SpaceX on the big loop. We're going to be commanding an increase to our C2V2 rate. We'll have a temporary drop in C2V2 return from Dragon for a little bit.
Freedom copies.
C2V2 is the common communication for visiting vehicles. The vehicles you're seeing now are not too far away, about 320 meters away from each other, just outside the keep-out sphere and swinging out and up in front of the station. Now, we talked about TDRS coverage and ground station coverage, but there is a link that allows the two vehicles to talk to one another. That's through a system called the Common Communication for Visiting Vehicles, C2V2. On board the International Space Station, NASA astronauts Matt Dominic and Mike Barrett are currently inside the cupola, getting some beautiful views of Dragon making its approach to the International Space Station, but they're also receiving data through this common communication link. Some of the data they're seeing of the range rate, and vehicle status and health are all being transmitted from the Dragon to the International Space Station. Status of that link will be provided over the Dragon to ground and its big loops, Dragon to ground loops and big loops, as we make our way around the Earth and continue with our coverage of the approach and docking. We're now over the continental United States, about 260 statute miles over the northern continental United States, getting some great views as Dragon makes its way towards the docking axis. Station and Dragon, almost directly over the northern border of North Dakota. We're getting views in the distant southern Canadian landscape. You can see Dragon moving sort of up from this view. These views provided by the external cameras that are mounted on the outside of the International Space Station. The camera's zoom and focus and aperture are being controlled by flight controllers here on the ground. In fact, here in the room with me at Mission Control Houston, that position is called the Cronus. They have autonomous control of the cameras on the outside and are able to use the pan, tilt, and zoom functions of the external cameras to provide these great views. We're closing in on 4 p.m. Central Time, 2 p.m. over there in the Pacific Coast, continuing to track Dragon's approach to the International Space Station. Now getting some distant views on some of northern Ontario, and of course the horizon of Earth. Now this view provided from the external cameras aboard station of Dragon with the nose cone open and the forward bulkhead facing the International Space Station. That provides the communication link, very strong link, and some of the forward bulkhead Dracos are now coming into view as Dragon becomes a little bit closer. We're just a little more than 300 meters from the station at this point. Now this slow trajectory is moving us up into what's called the docking axis. The docking axis is immediately in front of the space station today. We're heading towards the forwardmost port. Dragon Endeavour is currently docked to the Zenith port. This is the space-facing port. And Endeavour again will undock in approximately 7 days. This allows for a seamless handover of the Crew-9 crew and the Crew-8 crew before their departure. Endeavour is currently configured with extra seats for Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams, both NASA astronauts, who are scheduled to return aboard the Crew-9 Dragon, with those seats outfitted for emergency capabilities just in case. We're not going to be using them, though, because the Dragon and Freedom is well on its way to the International Space Station with those 2 empty seats. Upon
Freedom, SpaceX on the big loop. C2V2 transit rate increase is complete, so we're back with good comms.
Same copies.
C2V2, again, that communications channel, that is a link between the Dragon and the International Space Station. Back to a nominal config. We're now past the top of the hour and approximately 10 minutes away from the expected arrival of Waypoint 1. The views you're seeing from the International Space Station illuminating the capsule of Dragon Freedom there are covered by the setting sun and whereas we approach an orbital nighttime. As the station and Dragon Freedom pass over the western border of Quebec, the Terminator line that separates daytime from nighttime is over the Atlantic Ocean. It'll be just a few minutes until the expected sunset, and we'll lose some of the views that we have currently of Dragon Freedom. Now we're getting a flashing light from the center hatch of the exposed forward bulkhead, thanks to the open nose cone. But that blinking light is called a docking light. We'll be seeing those views. As we enter into an orbital nighttime, we'll see some of the navigation lights lit up. This includes the starboard light and the port light, starboard being green, port being red. That will show the relative position and orientation and attitude of Dragon as it makes its approach to the station. Now getting some camera views from inside Dragon Freedom, covered by some of the ground stations strategically positioned around the Earth. On the center console there, you can see the trajectory of Dragon as it approaches Waypoint 1. This will be right when it's right in the middle there. But the trajectory that you see that's curved is part of potential breakout maneuvers, which would be calculated at any point in Dragon's approach to the International Space Station to ensure the safety of the crew. We have passed several go, no-go checkpoints, everything looking healthy aboard Dragon and station. Ground teams in Houston and Hawthorne in position. Tracking good health on both of the vehicles and great milestones, good trajectory. Everything's looking good to proceed past Waypoint 1 inside the keep-out sphere. In the view on your right, we're starting to come up on a view of the International Space Station from the docking axis. Not quite there yet. We're expected to be there in about 6.5 minutes. So we're right immediately in front of the International Space Station. From there, we'll make our slow and methodical push in towards the docking axis through several waypoints. Waypoint 1 being, of course, meeting at the docking axis immediately in front. Waypoint 2 being inside the keep-out sphere. Commander Nick Hague in the view from inside the capsule. On the left from your screen, Mission Specialist Alexander Gorbanov on the right. Following along on Dragon's approach to Waypoint 1 immediately in front. The sun ahead of an orbital sunset, illuminating the station's solar arrays. 8 sets of the legacy arrays in view. We're inside 5 minutes from the expected arrival of Waypoint 1. The arrival of Dragon to Waypoint 1 should coincide almost exactly with the expected time of an orbital sunset, where we will lose the illumination of the outside of Dragon from the sun. If this is the case, right when we hear the call up on the big loop that we have passed Waypoint 1 and have begun what's called Approach 1, this is the burn that actually allows Dragon to start moving inside the docking axis towards the keep-out sphere, we might lose some of the illumination of the spacecraft, in which case you'll see some of the navigation lights, the green and the red lights. Sunrise is not expected until about 4:46 p.m. Central Time, 2:46 p.m. Eastern, in which case, if we proceed on the timeline as we are now, as expected, the expected docking time being just around 4:30, we will be docking during an orbital nighttime, which does meet the necessary lighting conditions for docking. Waypoint 1 arrival in just a little more than 2.5 minutes. We're continuing to follow along in the journey of Commander Nick Hague, NASA astronaut, and mission specialist Alexander Gorbanov, Roscosmos cosmonaut, on their way to the International Space Station. From here,
Freedom
in Mission Control,
SpaceX
Houston.
on the big loop. Approach 1 and soft capturing extension will begin shortly. Dragon will continue approach to Waypoint 2.
Copies.
That call from the ground confirms that all teams are go to proceed past waypoint 1. There will be no stopping at the waypoint 1. Dragon will execute its approach 1 maneuver burn and does have a go to enter inside the keep out sphere. This is at the 180 mark. Waypoint 2, though, is just 20 meters in front of the docking axis. We'll be proceeding in very shortly. All teams are go, everything looking good here from the International Space Station Flight Control Room in Houston, Texas. With that, as we continue to follow along, I'll toss it back to my colleagues over in Hawthorne. Leah and Ronnie, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Gary. So one of the things that's really interesting as we move up to waypoint 1 is that in a lot of ways, the trajectory we're on today, even though we've done these additional burns with Dragon's Draco thrusters, was set yesterday when we lifted off from Space Launch Complex 40. And that's part of the reason that we had an instantaneous launch window yesterday. A lot of that is driven by this rendezvous point between Dragon and the International Space Station in orbit, so that we can perform all of these maneuvers moving from waypoint 1 to waypoint 2, coming up here shortly, exactly on time and through this careful, very methodical approach between all of the teams currently participating. Here at SpaceX Hawthorne, obviously our crew on board Dragon, the International Space Station, and Mission Control in Houston. We are still expecting initial contact between Dragon and the International Space Station at about 2:30 p.m. Pacific time or 5:30 p.m. Eastern time. And before reaching waypoint 1, which again is coming up here very shortly, mission operators conducted a go, no-go poll, which we just heard, to allow Dragon to begin its approach to waypoint 2. That's, of course, located inside of the keep-out sphere, about 20 meters away from the space station.
Yeah, so again, like you just said, Ronnie is standing by to arrive at waypoint 1. However, we did hear the call that we will not be stopping at waypoint 1 today. There's always the option there if we wanted to stop at waypoint 1, and that brings us up and in front of the International Space Station, puts us on the docking axis, meaning we are right in front of Node 2, which is our docking port today, also known as Harmony. We actually had a really cool view earlier when we had that shot from Dragon where you could see Crew-9's Dragon at the zenith or space-facing port of Harmony. So hopefully, as we get closer, we get that view back. But once we get to waypoint 1, like you mentioned, we will start moving into waypoint 2. And if you look on the left of your screen, you can see Dragon changing color just a little bit. That was an orbital, sunrise. That was the delayed view of an orbital sunset. So they are now in an orbital nighttime, flying about 260 statute miles over the Atlantic Ocean. They'll be crossing over Africa soon. And if you see all those little colorful dots on your screen, not the ones on Dragon, but all of those other little specks, that is due to radiation hits on the camera. So those are not colorful stars in the background. I wish they were. That'd be very cool. But that is actually just a little bit of damage to the camera itself from being in the space environment.
Of course, the colorful dots on board Dragon are actually a pullover from the aviation industry being used to indicate the port and starboard sides of Dragon itself.
We've talked a little bit about the, obviously, Dragon Freedom docking today with Crew-9, and then the Dragon with Crew-8 that arrived and is at the zenith port of the Harmony module. But there are other visiting spacecraft on the space station right now. Those include the Soyuz MS-26 spacecraft, launched just a couple of weeks ago and brought up 3 additional crew members. They'll stay on board for about 6 months. We also have 2 Progress resupply spacecraft. Those are also from Roscosmos, Progress 88 and 89. Those are resupply spacecraft. So they come up with food, fuel, any materials or hardware for the crew living and working aboard. And then we also have Northrop Grumman's Cygnus 21, so their 21st flight to the International Space Station. That's another resupply spacecraft bringing up cargo and hardware.
Getting views still of Dragon as it approaches the space station here on your screen, fading a little bit as we head into that orbital nighttime.
We have
Houston Station on 2 on the big loop, 1.102, step 3. We are ready for docking.
Houston copies, and at waypoint 2, Dragon will hold for approximately 5 minutes.
copies. In correction of previous call, we're in step 3, not step 2.
Houston copies.
That sounds like NASA astronaut Matt Dominic. He is monitoring from inside the cupola. That is our window to the world aboard the International Space Station. So almost all of the photos that you see taken by our crew members are taken from inside the cupola, and that also allows us to monitor the arrival and departure of spacecraft like Matt and his colleague Mike Barrett, are also a NASA astronaut, are doing today. So we did hear the call out that they will hold at waypoint 2 for just a few minutes and then proceed in for docking. And good news that the station side is go for docking today.
Yeah, that's really exciting to hear, especially because we have been working through all of these methodical, careful steps in the lead up to this docking effort. About 20 meters away from the station's docking adapter, Dragon's approach is going to slow in preparation in part for that hold, and it will begin to align itself with the docking adapter to come in for that final approach.
Now, we did get confirmation that we have passed waypoint 1. Again, we're going to hold at waypoint 2. The waypoint 2 is about 20 meters from the International Space Station. So you can hold longer if you want to. We're going to hold about 5 minutes today, but you can hold longer if you want to, if you wanted to wait for better lighting conditions or just reconfiguring anything on either Dragon side or station side. But 5 minutes is a pretty short hold just to make sure everybody is ready for that final push in for docking. And then, like we also mentioned earlier, we'll have one last call out in that time frame, which will be CHOP. And that's the crew hands-off point. It happens about 2 meters from the International Space Station, so very close. And that means that if we needed to, if Dragon needed to back away from the space station at that time, it would not be executed by the crew. It would need to be executed by Dragon itself. So an autonomous retreat. And all of Dragon's flight has been autonomous. From all of its burns and its rendezvous and its docking itself, it'll be completely flying on its own. Now, this view on the right side of your screen from Mission Control Hawthorne, they have been on console for the last 26 hours, actually almost 28 hours now, monitoring the flight of Dragon up to the International Space Station. Just a couple of hours ago, we heard that big loop configured, meaning that Hawthorne, Dragon, the International Space Station, and Mission Control in Houston are all able to talk to each other.
Freedom SpaceX on the big loop, self-capturing extension complete. Reminder, we will be holding for about 5 minutes at waypoint 2. If you'd like, you can keep your visors up until we are getting ready to command into approach 2 out of that hold.
And Freedom copies, good self-dock ring extension. We're going to hold at waypoint 2. We'll keep visors up until then. And just to let you know, we are, station's pretty dark in the center line camera, looking at thermal until we get in closer.
SpaceX copies. Sounds good. And yeah, expected for the lighting conditions and eclipse now. Should brighten up in approach 2 on center line.
Copies.
Good confirmation there from Mission Control that we obviously have our Crew-9 astronauts suited up and waiting to approach that waypoint 2. We also heard the call out from Mission Control there that the astronauts are welcome to leave their visors up. One of the things that's pretty cool about the IVA suits is that they are fully integrated and tailored to the astronaut who is wearing them. So the visor is one of the only mobile parts of the suit. Everything else is connected. The helmet, the gloves, the boots, everything is custom tailored to the astronaut wearing that IVA suit, including everything going on to their communications with the ground, the umbilical that actually mates from the thigh of the suit to the chair on board of the Dragon spacecraft.
We did also hear that the soft capture ring is deployed. So there are sort of 2 phases to docking. There's soft capture. That's our initial contact for Dragon and the International Space Station. And then that ring will retract once we make that contact, and we'll start getting hard capture. That's when we get into those locks or those latches and hooks driving to provide a firm, secure connection from Dragon and the International Space Station. We'll also see some umbilical checks and connections as well, too. And we are standing by as well for a go, no go poll in Mission Control Houston. We may not hear it here, but we will have a go, no go poll from Mission Control Houston in just a couple of minutes for the docking. But it's good news all around so far. Heard that the astronauts aboard the International Space Station are ready for docking themselves. So we're standing by for Waypoint 2 coming up next. We may dock a little bit early today. We were targeting around 2:30 Pacific. That could happen about 2:26 p.m. Pacific time. So early is good. Early is good.
That's great. One of the other things we're hearing as we hear chatter back and forth between Mission Control are these beeps as comms begin, both outbound and inbound. Those actually date back all the way to the early days of human spaceflight and are known as Quindar tones. They used to effectively be radio signals that we had comms coming in and out. They're a holdover these days. They're not strictly necessary, but because they are part of the history of human spaceflight and a really convenient way for us to manage these communications back and forth between Mission Control and the astronauts, you can hear them on all of our crew launches on board Dragon, and obviously keeping us in touch not only with Dragon and Mission Control here in Hawthorne, but also the International Space Station and Mission Control Houston.
It also helps us know when that comms is coming here as communicators, because those are the most important comms of the day. Anything we say is much secondary. It takes a backseat to anything that you could hear from the crew members in orbit or the team members here on the ground really leading the operations. So we like to listen for those, and we are quick to be quiet as soon as we hear that there might be some crew comms incoming.
It also just sounds like space to me. I think it's the history of everything, and having seen it on all of the crew flights from Demo 2 to Crew-9 on board Dragon, that sounds like we have space coming in. I'm so always eager to hear what the crew or Mission Control has to say.
It looks like we're about 90 seconds away from Waypoint 2. Again, that's about 20 meters away from the space station. We are already on the docking axis, so we are right aligned with the Node 2 forward port, that Harmony forward port that Dragon will be calling home today.
And because of that, we are getting these views of Dragon with space in the background on that docking axis instead of the Earth behind it. So if you are just joining us, we don't have a super clear view right now, but the lights that you're seeing are Dragon on board your screen as it approaches the International Space Station. Again, if just in case you're just joining us, we are tracking initial contact between Dragon and our Crew-9 astronauts at about 2:26 p.m. Pacific time. That'll begin with that, obviously, soft capture followed by a hard capture. During the hard capture maneuver, Dragon will actually extend 12 hooks into the International Docking Adapter to make sure that we have really tight contact between Dragon and the space station before we begin pressurizing the vestibule between the two vehicles.
And again, we do expect that docking today will probably take place in darkness. Unfortunately, we love those views when we are in an orbital daytime. But like we mentioned earlier, we see 16 sunrises and sunsets a day. So we see about 45 minutes in darkness and 45 minutes in daylight. Right now, we are in one of those orbital night times, flying 261 statute miles over the country of Togo. So we are standing by again for Waypoint 2 arrival. We expect to pause, and it looks like we could see a couple of thruster firings as we get ready to execute that 5-minute hold at Waypoint 2 before moving in for final approach and docking to the Node 2 forward port with Dragon and Crew-9.
This is the second Dragon that's going to be mated to the International Space Station. Oh, we've got some good Draco pulses on your screen there right now. Again, this is the second Dragon that's going to be on board the ISS once we've got this docking complete today, because we do have the Crew-8 Dragon also currently mated to the International Space Station. Crew-8 and Crew-9 are going to do an active handover here, where the crews work together to transition current operations on board the station, any ongoing scientific research, and then Crew-8 will return home in about a week, depending on weather conditions, in the same capsule that they rode up on. So it's interesting because that capsule stays with the crew for the duration of their mission, which obviously means that we at SpaceX here are monitoring Dragon throughout the mission, from its initial launch, the entire time it's docked on station, through that splashdown for each crew.
Did just get confirmation that we are holding at Waypoint 2, so we may hear a call to the crew in just a moment confirming that as well. Again, expecting maybe a 5-minute hold, 20 meters right now away from the International Space Station. It is truly slow and steady, wins the race. With that 5-minute hold, we talked about maybe a 2:26 p.m. docking, a 2:30 p.m. docking. It's nebulous a little bit at this point. We just take the time that we need at this hold, and so we may be back a little bit closer to the 2:30 docking. But we will make sure to let you know exactly where the International Space Station and Dragon are flying, and the time of docking as soon as that happens. So this is the final hold in the mission before we welcome Dragon and Crew-9 to the station itself.
This really is a dynamic phase of flight, too. Part of the reason that we're monitoring these things and listening in on mission control is that we have a lot of teams working together to assess the situation as it unfolds. So the good news is that we've had a really smooth flight so far for our Crew-9 astronauts who did lift off yesterday from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. They spent about 28 hours on their way to the International Space Station. And as Leah mentioned, we are holding here at Waypoint 2, just about 20 meters away from the space station, awaiting that final approach and docking.
Currently, Mission Control Houston is conducting their poll to ensure that we are go for final approach and docking when we depart Waypoint 2. Again, final hold point for today's mission. So this is really game time. We are getting close to seeing these two new crew members arrive at the space station. Again, once they dock, it'll take about 2 hours for all of the operations required before we see them float through the hatch. That includes vestibule depressurization. That's the space between Dragon and the International Space Station itself. And right now it is exposed to vacuum so that Dragon can dock. So
Freedom SpaceX on the big loop. Ground is go for final approach. Confirm crew readiness for approach and visors are down.
And SpaceX Freedom, visors down. We are go for docking.
SpaceX copies. As a reminder, once Dragon is inside the crew hands-off point, retreat and breakout are not permitted.
Freedom copies.
And Freedom SpaceX, we are resuming approach.
Freedom copies.
Awesome news there from Mission Control, and of course hearing our Crew-9 astronauts on board Dragon that we are go for docking. If you're watching closely, you're also seeing some great pulses from those Draco thrusters on board as Dragon approaches the ISS for that final docking maneuver.
again, that was the final hold, and we heard the communications that we are go for docking and have resumed that approach. So we will not hold again. And they discussed CHOP, which we mentioned earlier, the crew hands-off point. That's within 2 meters from the International Space Station.
Station Houston on the big loop. Dragon is on final approach and is go for docking. Monitor per steps 5 and 6 in 1.102. Dragon approach and retreat monitoring.
Station copy, step 5 and 6.
So those sound like similar communications, but the first was to the crew on Dragon. The second is to our crew monitoring in the cupola, and you heard them reference what they should be looking at, any procedures that they're referencing during this dynamic phase. And we're continuing to see Dragon get closer to the International Space Station, now about 17 meters away from the docking port. Again, we do expect to be in an orbital nighttime during docking, but this is a pretty cool view, as you can see a camera coming from Dragon and focusing on the docking port itself. So it looks like we are properly aligned with that Node 2 forward port as we continue to approach, now just 15 meters away.
Seeing good real-time readouts on your screen there. Just in the upper right-hand corner, you can see our LiDAR geometry indicating how close we are to the International Space Station. LiDAR, of course, stands for light radar, and it is used in maneuvers like this in space to help two spacecraft meet each other.
And that helps us to not need daylight when we are executing these maneuvers. So again, I mentioned this is happening in the dark. We can hold and wait for different lighting conditions if we needed to, but because we have this LiDAR technology, we're able to continue moving in. And Like you mentioned, Ronnie, if you look in the top left, you can see we're now just about 10 meters away from
Freedom
the
is 10
International
meters.
Space Station. Oh, confirmation from the crew, 10 meters
Copy,
away.
10.
Of course, now we're also within that crew hands-off point, in large part because the autonomous systems on board Dragon, which we're getting kind of a representation of on your screen right now, are completing this final docking maneuver. Looks like just about 7.5 meters to go.
Again, first, we will be holding for soft capture. When that soft capture ring makes contact with the space station, that will then retract and begin hard capture. But docking for us is called at the time of soft capture.
Freedom, 5 meters.
Copy, 5.
Standing by for the arrival of Crew-9 to the International Space Station.
We are also getting some pretty good views here of Dragon approaching station, even though we are in an orbital nighttime and it's pretty dark. That's exciting to see how close these spacecraft are to each other.
Yeah, now just about 4 meters away. Standing by for the call for CHOP, crew hands-off point.
Freedom, 2 meters, hands off.
Less than 2 meters away, standing by for docking.
1 meter.
Freedom, SpaceX on the big loop, soft capture confirmed.
Freedom, copy. Speed soft capture.
Crew-9 has arrived to the International Space Station. Docking confirmed at 4:30 p.m. Central Time, 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time over Botswana.
Now, we still have a few steps to complete before Dragon is securely attached to the station, so we're going to go ahead and follow those along as well. We are standing by for the hard capture sequence start, and then we will also hear a call out for hard docking complete. We're expecting that a little bit more than 10 minutes from now.
Freedom, SpaceX, ring retraction in progress.
Freedom, copies. Retraction in progress.
Again, they're referencing the soft capture ring that will slowly retract and bring Dragon closer to the International Space Station. We'll get into that hard capture sequence with the hooks and latches, providing us a hard docking, and that happens about 10 minutes after docking itself. Again, Crew-9 arriving at the International Space Station as the station and Dragon were flying about 265 statute miles over Botswana at 4:30 p.m. Central Time, 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time.
Of course, those hard capture rings aren't the only thing that we're going to attach between Dragon and the space station. We also have a series of umbilicals and other systems that really help integrate Dragon to the space station once both vehicles are mated together.
And this continues to be a, I don't want to say slow, but a methodical process of bringing the crew on board the space station. So yes, we do consider them docked at this point. We are awaiting for that hard dock to be confirmed, but we will still have a couple of hours before we actually open the hatch and see the crew fly through. So NASA astronaut Jeanette Epps on the space station side is going to be prime. She's the lead for pressurizing the vestibule, that space between Dragon and the station hatch that will be opened and allow the crew members to fly through it and join their new home for the next 5 months. So we will stand by for that. But that does take a couple of hours, and then we will finally have 11 people aboard the International Space Station for about the next week.
Has to be an exciting time to be on station. Obviously, at this point, everything we're doing, as you mentioned, is very methodical. And that's because we're still in a dynamic phase of flight before we have all 11 members of our crew together on board Expedition 72. We've obviously heard a couple call outs to our crew that they are wearing their IVA suits, now visors down, due to the dynamic nature of this flight environment. And we'll move through all of these steps until we can bring everybody together. And then, like you mentioned earlier, maybe change into something that's a little bit less spacefaring, a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah, we'll probably see them float through in something like their flight suits. You know, NASA astronauts typically wear blue flight suits, so we'll see what they show up in today. But I am definitely looking forward to seeing them float through the hatch. Now, again, we only have 2 crew members on Dragon today arriving, and the 2 empty seats that were with them will be occupied by NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sunny Williams upon their return sometime next February. So we will be excited to see them back on Earth as well. So it's about a 5-month stay for NASA astronaut Nick Hague and Alexander Gorbanov, who have just docked to the International Space Station. Again, that happening at 4:30 p.m. Central, 5:30 Eastern, just about 4 or 5 minutes ago now. We are still standing by for soft capture ring retraction to be complete before the hard capture sequence starts and we get into driving those hooks and latches and firmly securing Dragon to the space station.
If you joined us during our webcast yesterday, you know that these hooks were actually exposed when we opened the nose cone shortly after Dragon made it to orbit. That's one of our major milestones during our launch event. We did have an on-time liftoff yesterday from Space Launch Complex 40, followed by
Freedom SpaceX ring retraction complete, docking sequence holding for MCS reconfiguration.
Copy is holding for MCS reconfig.
So confirmation that the soft capture ring, that first step in the docking process, has completely retracted. We will soon move into the hard capture process. Sounds like they're standing by for reconfiguration before doing so. But you can hear that the crew on Dragon are still speaking with the core here in Hawthorne, the crew operations resource engineer. So once they float into the hatch, though, they really become Expedition 72 crew members, not just Crew-9 crew members. And they will start communicating almost solely with the flight director the Capcom in Houston. That's the capsule communicator. Really serves the same role as what we have here in Hawthorne with the core. That's the single person in the room that communicates with the crew. That keeps all of the communications streamlined, so you don't have a ton of different voices at different consoles.
Station Houston, on the big loop, MCS configured, proceeding with hook driving.
Station copies.
There's confirmation there that we are moving forward with that hard docking and that we're talking over the big loop. So as you mentioned earlier, right now we're all communicating each team with different key personnel to minimize the amount of crosstalk that we have, but everyone can hear each other. The big loop does include mission control here in SpaceX, mission control Houston, the Dragon spacecraft, and the International Space Station.
And I can see that we do have those hooks starting to drive. There are 2 sets of 6, so we'll have 1 set of 6 that will listen to here is complete before they start driving the second set, and that really secures that Crew-9 has arrived at the space station.
And we're getting good views of Crew-9 on your screen right now. Looking over their shoulders at their displays, obviously giving them information about their status as we continue to perform this hard capture sequence with the International Space Station.
And they're able to monitor the entire flight all the way from launch yesterday, 10:17 a.m. Pacific, 1:17 p.m. Eastern, all the way through the docking process right now by watching those screens that you could see. It's 3 monitoring screens, or 3... It is 3 monitoring screens.
Display screens, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. And so they have the opportunity to continue monitoring there. However, they do also have the ability to take over and manually command the spacecraft if they needed to. But we didn't see that on this flight. It was a pretty smooth ride uphill for Dragon all the way to docking at the space station. Again, about 7 minutes ago now. We are continuing to watch the hooks drive and secure us to the International Space Station.
Looks like we should have just about 5 minutes until we have confirmation of that hard docking completion. Currently expecting that at about 2:43 p.m. Pacific time.
And like I mentioned earlier, during this time, we keep any of the crew members that are on the space station from exercising. So any exercise that happens in space can impart loads on the spacecraft itself. So those might be very small, but this is a pretty specific sequence. We want to make sure all those hooks and latches go in the right place. And so they have to hold off from exercising for the time being. Crew members on the space station exercise for about 2 hours every day. That helps keep their bones and muscles strong. That way, when they get back to Earth, they can recover much faster and are able to walk almost immediately.
That's incredible. There's a lot of very cool exercise-focused research going on board the International Space Station, as I understand it, including both a treadmill, a stationary bike, lots of different ways to keep them strong, even in microgravity, before they make it back down to Earth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's another one of those things that proves how important what we do on the space station also is for benefits here on Earth, because what we've learned is also kind of a look into people who deal with osteoporosis or their bones, deteriorating because without lack of exercise in orbit, we're using our bones and muscles just to stand here right now, but you really don't when you're in space. So you have to do that continued exercise. And so what we're able to learn in space about exercise and the importance of it, we can also look to apply back here down on Earth from people who struggle with osteoporosis as well.
There's a huge amount of crosstalk, actually, between microgravity research that's done both on board Dragon, whether it's through one of our NASA missions or our commercial missions, and the International Space Station, all that benefit life here on Earth, whether that's things like focused on bone health or even very specific disease pathways. It's interesting to give us that opportunity to look at different types of research that we can do for whether it's biological or nutrition. We talked a little bit earlier today about the number of plant experiments that are currently ongoing on board the ISS, all studying how we can deliver different amounts of nutrition to our astronauts on those future long-duration exploration missions. And of course, then there are parallels for that on Earth as well.
It's been 10 minutes since our docking today, and I see the first set of 6 hooks are now fully driven into the International Space Station, and the second set is now driving. So we are in the process of hard docking. Again, that takes about 10 minutes after docking, so we anticipate seeing that complete soon. But we did dock today, really right on the target time, 2:30 p.m. Pacific time, 5:30 p.m. Eastern time.
That's really incredible, too, because even though we mentioned it earlier, it bears repeating. We hit that 2:30 p.m. today because we had an on-time liftoff yesterday during an instantaneous launch window. This entire approach to the International Space Station is carefully...
SpaceX hard capture complete.
Oh, confirmation of hard capture. That's great.
Standing by for umbilicals as well.
Copy, hard capture complete.
Welcome aboard, Freedom.
Of course, now that Dragon has completed the docking sequence, the spacecraft needs to undergo a handful of checks, including hooking up that umbilical.
I know you've been waiting a while.
Just to see your smiling faces.
Once we get those checks complete, we'll obviously be able to get those crew members united on either side of Dragon and the ISS right now. But the crew on board Dragon now gets a chance to get out of their spacesuits before moving into hatch operations.
That's right, and things will be picking up inside the station too as NASA's Jeanette Epps gets the hatch on the station side ready to be opened. She's going to start pressurizing that area known as the vestibule between the Dragon and the station hatches. So we are standing by for confirmation of umbilical hard mate to the International Space Station, but we did hear both of those sets of hooks drove and we are officially hard docked. So we are just standing by for umbilical.
Station on the big loop. We are standing down from Crew Dragon approach monitoring.
Houston copies.
And deconfiguring work.
All right, again, we docked right on time here at 4:30 p.m. Central Time, 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time as Dragon and the International Space Station were flying over Botswana. And our teams in Mission Control Houston are continuing to monitor the arrival. So with Dragon docked, that's going to do it for us here in Hawthorne, but our coverage for Crew-9 will not stop here.
In a minute, we're going to toss it to Gary in Mission Control Houston to take us through that vestibule depressurization effort and hatch opening, when we'll see NASA astronaut Nick Hague and Roscosmos astronaut Alexander Gorbanov float into the International Space Station. But first, let's quickly recap how they got here. First, of course, we began with suit up with both of our astronauts and Crew-9 members putting on their IVA suits. Then they rode out to the launch pad for vehicle ingress. We had an on-time liftoff from Kennedy Space Center, pad 40, yesterday at 1:17 p.m.
Freedom SpaceX on the big loop. Docking sequence complete. Ground will be enabling hardline power and comm connection shortly. Go to doff suits per procedure 4.012. We'll take cameras external.
SpaceX Freedom copies. A little bit broken there, but you're putting in hardline comm. You gave us a go for suit doffing.
Affirm, Nick. Docking sequence is complete. We are enabling hardline power and comm connections. And Concur, yeah, you can go ahead and doff your suits in 4.012. I will take cameras external.
Okay, copy that. We're starting to doff our suits, and you'll go external. Thanks.
Confirmation from Mission Control there that we are go for suit doffing for our Crew-9 astronauts. Again, we are following up from a successful on-time launch yesterday from Space Launch Complex 40 at 1:17 p.m. Eastern. That was followed by a Stage 1 landing of our booster on Landing Zone 1. So that was a return to launch site landing, which we had great coverage of on our webcast if you want to take a look at that. That, of course, was followed by Dragon separation into a nominal orbit to set our Crew-9 team on their 28-hour journey to the International Space Station. We saw 5 major burns on board Dragon and then confirmed docking just a couple of minutes ago at 2:30 p.m. Pacific, 5:30 p.m. Eastern today, Sunday, September 29th.
And now that Crew-9 has arrived, we're turning our focus and looking ahead to the return of Crew-8. They're going to be taking you, or will be taking you along, as they return home after their long-duration stay aboard the space station. We're still looking at the return dates. That involves especially weather at our splashdown location. So those will be announced on nasa.gov. Be sure to tune in as NASA and SpaceX bring you live coverage every step of their journey. You can also follow SpaceX and NASA on social media for real-time updates. Thanks again for watching. Go NASA, go SpaceX, and go Crew-9 and Crew-8. And for those of you watching on X, please head over to NASA Plus to follow the coverage live. From Waypoint 0 to Waypoint 1, that swings it up and out in front of the station, arriving at a distance of approximately 200 meters, and 220 meters, I should say, because that puts it on what we